All right. Uh, Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Game and a Chat. This week, I have with me the creator of FRACT, which just came out. Um, and so we're going to be running through the game and just sort of talking about it. And also, just, I guess, to get us started, could you give us a quick rundown of what FRACT is?
Oh, what it is?
Yeah.
So, FRACT is a kind of first-person exploration puzzle game, and kind of it's all built on sound and music. So you explore this huge, massive open world, and you come across these puzzles and these broken down structures. And as you bring aspects of it back to life, you're not only shaping the sound of the world around you, but you're shaping the sound of the music as well. So we almost kind of end up tricking the player into writing this sort of dynamic soundtrack that happens around them as they progress through the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this place is. It doesn't look like most games. How did you end up settling on creating such a distinct style?
Well, I have a background of kind of graphic design and art direction, as well as kind of a passion for motion design. And I guess there's obviously the original Tron has always had a huge influence on me,
Mhm.
both aesthetically, but also just from a creative standpoint. In that, we have this technology, we have computers. I kind of am amazed sometimes at how much time we spend trying to emulate photorealism. And I'm not a photorealism hater by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like, come on, guys, let's do something completely new. Let's build completely imaginative and really interesting worlds. So that was another kind of inspiration to make something that could only happen inside of a computer or only happen, something like that. Yeah.
Hmm. What sort of feelings were you trying to evoke with this?
Well, I think a lot of the exploration comes down to the inspiration, some of the inspirations that kind of started this whole process, the original prototype, and kind of this idea that's been growing for quite a few years, and that musical exploration is kind of like this can be a really playful and satisfying thing. And when I first started playing around with early music making software, or well, not that early, like I guess late '90s, so Rebirth and early trackers and stuff, I found that really kind of inspiring and really flexible and playful, and just this sort of like twisting a knob and not truly knowing what it did, but at the same time getting this awesome feedback, and that sort of feeling of just kind of that finding the fun in music always inspired me, and I wanted to build a world around that, and I wanted to build tools around that, and that's kind of where Fract evolved into, that feeling.
Hmm. Well, I mean, you've been working on this for quite a long time, haven't you?
Yes, sir. This has been a little over 3 years since we kind of won the student IGF, and then said, let's do this. Let's make this into a real project, and release it. Yeah, it's been a little over 3 years.
Man.
A long road, not a simple road, to be perfectly honest, but we made it, and we're really happy with where we are now.
Hmm. And so, I mean, I remember at least at one point the game underwent a pretty substantial change from what you originally envisioned it being. But I mean, how much has it changed over time throughout the course of development?
We joke that we've kind of paved over and rebuilt on top of the world several times, but it's actually pretty accurate. I'd say there's been two or three ginormous world changes over the course of the game, and with that came with big design changes as well. We and that analogy of like building over the ruins of what we covered up is apt as well, because sort of what we learned and the tools we developed then were then definitely kind of fed into like these future iterations of the world and the future iterations of the game as well. Yeah.
Well, so I guess the other sort of big theme that I've at least heard about tangentially is that like this is a fairly personal work for you.
Well, yeah, I'd say that's fair. but it's a personal work about like personal exploration. So we wanted to keep it open. We want people to explore and draw what they can from this world on their own, without kind of enforcing my ideas or our ideas. So yes, while I think there's of course personal motivation, I mean, it's got to be there. At the same time, we really want people to come into this world, put their mark on it, and then take out what they want to take out of it as well, you know? Yeah.
Well, that's definitely an interesting thing, because I do feel like for a while there was a trend in, I guess, sort of in development of not indie games, but at least like games with sort of smaller development staffs to have like a meaning behind it, or to have this very deliberate, like, this is what our game is about. But I do feel like people are kind of moving away from that now into like what you said, which is we want players to come and have in this space and sort of take away their own meaning from it. And so So I guess, like, do you feel like in some cases it can be detrimental to have that initial, like, because you know, you said that it's personal for you, but at the same time you don't necessarily want to color what players think about it. So do you think it can be detrimental to have that, like, out in the open? To say, like, here's what the game means for me as the creator.
Oh, I've never said what the game means to me as a creator.
Oh,
to
sir.
say that we don't have like a design bible or a narrative structure that like our decisions and our design choices were built upon isn't the case. That said, that's not for me to say. Like, this game's always about people coming in and, you know, making, like I said, making their mark and taking away what they can from it. So I don't see a reason for me to even necessarily share that. Maybe corner me in a bar with a couple beers and maybe we can have that conversation. But no, the game's really about your experience right now, like what you're taking out of it, and I stand by that as really it's core to this experience. And could it be detrimental? I don't see how it really could be. I think it might mean that the game might not resonate with everyone, but I don't know that like that's I guess in that scenario that's possible, but we're okay with that. And I mean, it's unfortunate, but yeah, we're okay with that too.
So have you, I mean, I imagine you talked to a lot of people who've played your game, like, over the years and stuff. What sorts of things have other people taken away from it?
This sense of kind of ownership of their choices, of the sort of musical sort of decisions they made. There's varying degrees of flexibility in the game in terms of how you go about solving things based on how you interpret the systems or the mechanics, or how playful you are with how things kind of grow. And that's been really interesting to hear, like, people's individual kind of takeaways. I think it's been really exciting. And every once in a while I see how people solve the puzzle, and I'm like, oh yes, I mean, we built these to be flexible, but I've not seen this. So from a mechanical perspective, yeah, big time. That's been really awesome. But equally, I've also noticed that at least one thing that really came through at PAX was we really, I mean, it comes out in a lot of the writing about the game recently that we don't really hold your hand very much, and that's part of it. That was very intentional. It's about kind of exploring this world and exploring these systems, and for the most part, like especially at PAX, and a lot of the responses we've been getting is people really appreciate that. Like we were really interested in kind of treating players like people who can figure this out. Like, you know, they are predominantly intelligent people. Like, people are smart. They're gonna figure out this weird stuff we made, and it's been really satisfying to hear that resonating with people. Like, oh yeah, I got it. Oh yeah, this is so satisfying once I start making these connections, and once I start understanding how the systems in this world kind of come together. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like it would not be outside the. Is Myst one of your primary influences on that front?
It's definitely a big one, for sure. I think that world resonated well with me. The idea of it kind of felt like there was something there, and you were discovering this space that, even if it was improbable, felt very realized, felt very kind of real in that way. And yeah, definitely, Myst was definitely an influence. And ultimately, a lot of adventure games from that era, I grew up playing those with my family, huddled around like a 13-inch CRT, and we'd every Christmas we'd go through one or two like LucasArts games, and it was very so there's definitely some nostalgia as well, but that was an era of gaming that I really loved, because it you really, except when you had to log into the BBSs to get hints, you really felt like you owned those achievements, you know. And so those games as well were definitely an influence as well.
So how do you go about bringing believability to such an unbelievable place? What do you think for you personally, what are the keys to that?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I completely understand what you mean.
Well, you were talking about how like games like Myst, despite despite being these places that couldn't necessarily entirely happen, still felt like they were real. And so,
okay, yes.
How do you bring that, especially to a place like this, which is, I mean, I look around this, and obviously this could never happen in the real world, but it still definitely has a sense of place to it.
When I used to work in art direction, there was one creative director who he was really hard on us, but he was a really good creative director. And I think even in my design education, there was some teachers that really kind of grasped at this. And over the years, I've tried to use it where I could, and that is making things more or less why-proof or why-resistant. So in other words, why are we doing this? Why are we making this? Why is this in the world like this? And I think those answers don't necessarily have to be super profound sometimes, but they have to be justified. And sometimes the answers are deep and profound. It's like, well, why is this here? Why are these mountains here? Why are we? And then it concatenates up whether it's like, why are we making this bloody game for 3 years? Which is a question we certainly asked ourselves a couple of times. Yeah, and it can also go down to the other end of the spectrum where it's like, why is this pink? And it's like, well, there could be a really important answer. It's like, well, it's part of the visual language. We're using that to establish this hierarchy, blah, blah, blah. And you could also answer every once in a while because I like it and it feels cool. I think that's, there's a huge spectrum of making something why resistant. But I think we tried, and I know I've definitely tried to keep that when designing this game or designing whatever it is I'm working on. Yeah.
So the other big component of this, aside from this giant world full of many largely polygonal objects, is the music. And so how did the game evolve concurrently with the music? Because I mean, I imagine I guess first off, where did you start? Did you start with the idea of this puzzle-filled world, or did you start with the idea that you wanted to make a game based around music?
It definitely, the kernel started with music. Some early probably sketched, basically ideas for FRACT have been kind of peppered in notebooks for nearly a decade. Sometimes they weren't video games, sometimes they were installations, sometimes they were websites, sometimes they were prototypes for I don't even know what, building my own electronic instruments and what have you. So it always started with music and this exploration, this sort of almost world of just finding the fun in music, whether you're musical or not. Music is universal. Everyone can bang on a drum and get satisfaction. And I think I'm maybe straying a bit from your question. Can you come and wrangle me back before I go on a crazy tangent here? Okay,
just
where did we start? So we started with that respect in terms of the music. No,
yes.
go ahead. I think maybe out
Well,
of
yeah.
sync
So
with
like,
you.
just so going beyond that,
Mm.
how did music make the game evolve? Because I mean, I guess I've talked to other developers working on games that heavily involve music, and they say something like, "Well, I had this one idea for an area, and then I had a song put to it, and then I suddenly realized, okay, well, I can actually take this elsewhere because the song is making me feel these things, or like it makes more sense to have this type of level paired with the song with this tempo or whatever." So I mean, was that something you encountered?
Yeah, and there was a lot of iteration and a lot of back and forth. Early on, we we were just sort of testing the boundaries of what we could achieve in terms of musicality and the tools that could provide interaction on a musical sort of scale. That in turn shaped a lot of the tech we built. And then once we kind of had that tech in place, that evolved the design and back and forth to the point where we were always kind of almost building these really abstracted musical instruments, and then finding possible gameplay scenarios within them. And that iteration that happened for a long time, longer than I think we expected it to take. So it wasn't the core of like a piece of music. It was more about the exploration of making music with sort of a playful system that shaped a lot of the components of the game. And truth be told, we did sort of, when we first started seeing the realization of the tech that we had, like we were like, holy, we're making bloody real-time synthesizers and a video game. We thought, well, let's teach people how to use synthesizers. And the original goal was something much more technical. So teaching people how envelopes work, how filters work. And while that was exciting at first, we realized that actually strayed away from the idea of this inclusiveness and this playfulness, and we really kind of recentered and said, no, this is about building almost like musical toys for people to jam with and make cool stuff. So there definitely was an adjustment of that goal. And at first it felt like we were, oh no, this is, we're giving in. But we quickly realized that enriched the idea, and enriched and reminded us why we were doing everything so much. So yeah.
That's definitely very interesting. Because so I mean, we already published one piece about it, and it's definitely interesting to hear your intentions matched against the criticisms in that piece, because it definitely seems like you were a lot more focused on creating something, like you said, a musical toy, something that people could experiment with and sort of find these little I just had a great moment right here, just putting together this little puzzle, and there's already that little backing beat, and then it added all this sound to it as soon as I got something going. That was really cool. But the big criticism from the piece that we ended up publishing is that it felt like some of this was busy work in between, I guess, exploring this environment full of wonder. And so, I mean, how do you react when people criticize your game in that way?
Well, I'd kind of be a hypocrite after just saying that it's all open to one's interpretation and what someone puts in takes out, to disagree with something like that. So I think if someone were to come into the game and not make that connection, and not kind of feel inspired by the choices they make, or the sort of the achievements that this world provides, then that's, by my own definition just a couple of minutes ago, that's totally fair. I don't we are, like I said, we are prepared for this game not to resonate with everyone, but I feel like when this game does resonate with people, it really does, and it makes a strong emotional and, for some people, learning connection that I think is very real, and we're really proud of that. We stand by those decisions for those interactions that arise. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I feel like there's always a point where when you're making something that you've been working on for so long, you have to like be satisfied with it and let it go. Or even if you're not satisfied with it, just you've got to eventually release something. So like, what was that point like for you?
You mean just being done, I
Yeah,
guess?
just I guess deciding like, yeah, I'm ready to let this out into the world.
It's a tricky it's a really tricky balance. I'm glad I've had the opportunity to work on creative projects in different industries because it kind of prepares you to be done. Because we could have polished this for, I don't know, 3 more years. Like it could have been, or longer. You could just work on something like this forever. But ultimately, there's a point of not only diminishing returns but sanity that you need to just be like, okay, we're gonna go totally nuts if we continue in this way. And thankfully, I think we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. I think we first saw it like a good 6 or 8 months ago, but it's taken 6 or 8 months to like get it to that point where we feel like it's there. So yeah, I mean, it feels awesome to be done. It feels awesome to see how people are reacting to it. The sort of way that people are kind of interpreting the systems in the game and their personal experiences as well. So yeah, it feels pretty awesome to be done. Like we're in the midst of post-launch, which has also got its own terrifying aspects as well. But overall, it's moving forward, and that feels great.
In those moments where you felt like sanity was at stake, like what keeps you pushing forward on a project like this?
We've got an awesome team. My wife Quinn and our programmer Hank. Like, we've really grown in terms of like the way we communicate with each other and just how we work together. And like I think we're just become really respectful of each other and everything. So yeah, we've had some stresses. I think um, our team has been a big factor in like surviving. Also, we're really like we're 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 proud of this super weird game we made. So that's also motivational. Like, there was times, because it's so open and everything's so connected, there aren't discrete levels, there aren't kind of these discrete moments in the game where you like, okay, you moved on to here, so we can just kind of forget about that thing you did before. Like, a lot of the decisions you make in this game concatenate up. So when things weren't working, it affected everything holistically. So that was really challenging and kind of demotivating at times. But yeah, for the past while, it's been working, and it's really motivating to be like, okay, this crazy weird thing that we're making is coming together, and it excites us immensely. And I think my wife and I are really lucky to have an awesome little daughter. So it's that's been a really, like, she's 2 and she's amazing, and I learned so much about learning and about play just interacting with her, and she's a hugely motivating factor to just keep on going. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, how does, because I imagine like toward the end of this, you're probably crunching pretty hard. How does having such a young kid in your life affect your ability to create?
At first, it was detrimental, to be perfectly honest, because we were like freaking out because we just had a baby and we're not sleeping and all that. But that just comes from being a parent. But after that, I think it was hyper positive. It focuses you so much more. I've always been I've always made stuff, and I've always been good at making stuff. And after we had Zoe and we got back in the groove of being parents and making stuff, both my wife Quinn and I were kind of repulsed at how little we got done before we had her. And we were very busy people before we had her. So now it's like, oh, I have 3 minutes. I have to make a decision. It has to be good. So I think more than anything, it really forces you to be super decisive. And as long as you make the right choice, more than 50% of the time, you're going to move forward. So yeah, it's super exhausting, but equally um, hyper rewarding.
Well, then in terms of learning about learning, what have you learned from
Mm.
having a kid? Like, because this game, especially, I feel like you really have to hone in on like what it's teaching you, but in a very invisible way. You can't just like say tutorial. Here's how to do this thing.
Um, I mean, it's just amazing how much we learn through play. I
Hmm.
think just in fact, I'd say nearly all of my daughter's like developmental sort of changes have come through play, like playing with things and sort of understanding simple things like physics or just it's unbelievable how much kids learn through play. So I just think that games have this amazing opportunity to not even teach heavy-handedly, like really, really specific things, but just even teaching in the context of their systems, just to be kind of, where possible, respectful of the player, and and make things make things fun. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think the other big strength of a game, obviously, in terms of teaching, is that it's more or less, even if the game has its own inherent risks, like within the game world, it's risk free overall. It's not like
Yep.
the Matrix or something. If you mess up, you're not gonna die in real life. Um, so, how much was it a focus for you to like? Was there ever a point where you like, for instance, thought, let's have more of a punishment if the player fails, or was this kind of always meant to be a more soothing, kind of gradual experience?
It's always meant to be soothing and kind of gradual, for sure. I think I think there's definitely room for those sort of experiences, and I'd be fibbing if I didn't have ideas for those types of experiences as well. But definitely for this, it was about feeling safe. It was about feeling empowered. Music can be intimidating, especially, I don't know, I walk into a music shop and they've got synthesizers and all this kind of crazy stuff on the walls. And even if you want to walk up and twiddle some knobs or hammer on some keys, it can be intimidating. And we didn't want people to feel afraid or intimidated. If anything, we wanted people to cultivate a sense of, empowerment and be like, yeah, I'm gonna twist that knob and try that out.
Well, yeah, and I think that is one thing for a lot of people is that music has this initial hump you have to get over before you start like really getting into it. For a lot of people, I think it's that moment like when they play their first song or something, when it feels like something, when everything came together. But I mean,
Mm,
I definitely have noticed recently that there have been more games that sort of explore music as like a toy or less of a lesson book and more of
mm,
here's some things that let you make cool sounds. Um, how key do you think
yeah.
that is in getting more people involved in music? And I mean, is that kind of an an unspoken goal of your game? Do you think that like did you ever get into it and think like I really hope that when people play this, they realize that they want to make music?
Um, Maybe goals a bit strong, but it's a hope. I mean, I think based on kind of my experiences with sort of early electronic music software, it was definitely a primer for me to explore deeper. And I don't know. I mean, if this could be a primer for someone to say, "Hey, I'm gonna try this stuff out," or try out some other free tools online, or some other great software that just kind of lets them express themselves musically. Like I could not be happier if that happens. Will it happen? I don't know. I mean, it would be awesome. It
Hmm.
would be awesome for sure.
Well, earlier you were talking about your background in other mediums as well. What all have you done outside of games?
I worked in I worked in print. I worked in large scale print for a long time, doing banners and wraps and graphic design for that stuff. Then I started working in art direction, mostly for web, but a little bit of broadcast media as well. Lots of graphic design, so lots of making stuff on computers. So lots of semi-transferable skills to the games, to making games. But games is pretty new. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because it definitely, I feel like in a lot of cases, when people come over from other backgrounds, the games they produce tend to be a little bit more outside the typical, I guess, box of games, which makes sense. Like if your only primary influence on making games is games, then it's a pretty narrow selection of things to draw on.
I think that's
Um,
very much changing right now, though. Like I see even within some more like artsy communities are like even the more indie communities that notion of outsiders coming in and making cool stuff even a couple of years ago might not have been super popular, but now it's like it's everyone's game. Like anyone can make a game, and I think that's what's super exciting is that there's yeah, like the tools are there, and I think anyone can step up and give it a whirl. There's so many cool things to be made in games. We're just scratching the surface.
yeah, certainly. For you personally, though, what do you draw on when you step into a space and say, like, yeah, I'm gonna make a game. I'm going to make some mechanics around this.
Um, I think I think I'm really interested in kind of things that resonate with me in a real world play sort of way.
Hmm.
To say that I'm not inspired by games would be inaccurate, but it's not. I don't think I would draw from games as my first inspiration for game ideas. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I, I would never do something for me personally that I didn't have like a real vested interest in, because if it's something that I'm intrinsically like it's part of my life, then I think about it and I think about the parameters of it and maybe find the play or the game inside there. So I think for me at least it would have to be something that's part of my life that I am regularly interacting with and obviously probably care a fair amount about. Yeah, I mean that's a very vague answer, I guess, but
Hmm. Let's see. I've been fiddling with this puzzle for a while.
do you want a hint?
Maybe.
You can stand on them when you're interacting with them.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense. Now I feel stupid. That's something worth
No, no.
that's something worth going into though. When you're designing a puzzle, what's the difference between the space where the sweet spot where it's tough, but the player overall feels smart for having figured it out, versus a puzzle where they get stumped on it for a while and they feel dumb and they just come away sort of like, even when they finally solve it, they feel more frustrated. Like they feel relieved they finally got past that thing, but they're like, just like, ugh, I don't feel good about that.
So, judging from my interactions with anyone who's ever designed a puzzle game,
Mhm.
no one solved that question. No one has that formula that I've interacted with. Um, and it's not necessarily because of an explicit like design issue, at least in my experience. It's we're all different. We all have different sort of cognitive, almost baggage when we come into interacting with something like a puzzle. In some cases, we've even had the same person interact with the same puzzle on a different day and come away with a completely different experience. That could be because of their state of mind. That could be because they're tired. That could be because maybe they're cranky. My own wife, who's actually helped design a lot of these puzzles, has some days thrown her arms up in the air and been like, "These suck," and I'm like, "You help make these. How can they suck?" So it's it's a balance, and it's also maybe and we certainly didn't, we certainly gave ourselves a good challenge by not only designing a puzzle game but also designing a puzzle game with very little explicit direction. So within that already a bit of a challenge, yeah, we've given ourselves a pretty ambitious challenge on top of that as well. But it's a super tricky balance, but for sure. And I think that magic of like finding that fine line between empowerment and bewilderment is a really cool thing. And I think if you're riding that line, that's where the great stuff happens. If you kind of go in one direction too far, the player can feel like, why am I bothering doing this? This is just uninteresting. Or at the other end of the spectrum, they feel like bewildered and they don't understand. and it's when you kind of juggle like in the middle there that I think the most rewarding and powerful um, discoveries are made. So yeah, it's wicked hard. It took 3+ years, and and our game isn't necessarily perfect.